Today on GovCon M&A Talk, our guest started and grew her company over decades before transferring ownership. But here's the thing. She now has a new company that focuses on teaching other business owners what she's learned about communications at M&A inflection points. Today with Elizabeth Shea, founder of TreeFork Strategies.
This is GovCon M&A Talk, presented by Orange Slices. I'm Sharon Heaton of sbLiftOff, and I live and breathe GovCon M&A. So let's talk deals.
There, it's very nice to see you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today, Elizabeth. I want to hear the story of your company. You started a company, oh gosh, back in the 1990s.
Yes.
Why did you start a company and what were you thinking at the time?
Well, I wasn't thinking what ended up happening, as many times happens with founders of new businesses. I started the company in 1997, so I know I'm dating myself, as a way to address what I saw as a need in the marketplace. I had moved from Silicon Valley and was in the tech industry and moved to the DC area, and there really weren't a lot of technology companies here. And the company that I went to work for was looking for a PR firm that specialized in tech companies. And so, if there aren't many tech companies here, there were not many public relations firms that specialized in that arena. So, I decided to start one. I thought, well, I'll have some flexibility and some freedom in life. And little did I realize that that was exactly what you don't get when you start your own business. So that was part of the start of the organization. I ended up growing it over the next. I had a business partner at one point. I ended up exiting, or I ended up buying out her part of the business after about 10 years. So I went through that transaction, which was really the precursor for the eventual exit that I took with the firm. The company was called Speakerbox Communications, and we had a really nice run up until about 2029 or 2019 when we ended up selling and exiting. But we focused primarily on business to business and business to government technology firms. Now, that included government contractors. So that's partly why there's the overlap with the government contracting M&A.
Completely relevant to the audience here. What made you decide that now was the time for you to transfer? I mean, you've been working on it for decades. You bought out your partner and you're saying, okay, I've done this. Why did you sell?
Well, interestingly enough, in the PR firm that I owned and ran and then eventually sold, a lot of our clients, as being tech companies and government contractors, wanted to exit and wanted to exit. And so that was part of our services package that we provided to our clients. And I just found that I was so passionate about it, even companies that were fundraising, to be involved at the C level, to have conversations about what is required in an exit and what's going to make a company that much more attractive to a suitor, to have a higher enterprise value. I just enjoyed that part of that role within the company. So after we sold and we exited to a company called REQ, I stayed around for another 3 or 4 years, exited that company just about a year ago, and realized my passion is really truly in helping business owners and particularly founders find their way, increase their enterprise value, and have that be represented to the outside world.
Well, you stand on both sides of the divide. Very often we have wonderful business owners on the show, and then
Mhm.
we have service providers on the show. You are both.
I am
You've
both.
basically, and that's a wonderful situation to be in. And basically, you've taken your substantive experience in communications, and have brought that as a service provider, but that was your business. What did you think of being a business owner? What about being a business owner surprised you?
The first go around or the second go around? Because it's different.
Okay, not the last year, when you were first building the company.
I think when I was first building the company, I didn't appreciate until, literally after probably a decade of working in the business, that there were so many fundamentals that would help me to build a better business that would eventually help me to exit that I didn't realize were important. Things like the fact that I'm not the only person in town. I'm not the only person at this company. And I need to make sure that the business isn't dependent upon me. I need to make sure that our clients and our employees stay and we don't have a high attrition program. I need to make sure that we have recurring revenue. I need to make sure that all the business fundamentals that I hadn't thought about when I started what I thought was a lifestyle business, it really isn't a lifestyle business. It really needs to become an entity that served a greater purpose. And that transition was very different. It was tough. It was a tough transition for me to go through. But when I went through it, I felt like this is a solid business. And now we're ready to exit because we have this solid business. And then the second time, now I feel like it's more about just finding my passion and helping the clients that I have find their passion, and that brings me great joy. And it's just a different perspective. But it is always, it is a tough transition, as you probably heard from many of your guests, to be a business owner and to be a CEO and exit and not be in charge anymore and have to go through that transition and that struggle. And so I found that that struggle was real, and I'm going to go back to the struggle of being a business owner.
Things that I like to joke about, but it's not really a joke, it's true, is that business owners who transfer tend to make terrible employees. You're so used to making a decision and moving on. You're so used to being in charge that the idea of having to turn to somebody else and saying, "What do you think about this? And can I have the authority to do so?" is very, very challenging. So those 2 or 3 years that you stayed with the buyer must have been that kind of rub for you of, hey, wait a minute, I just do these things. Now I need to go ask.
Yes, yes. Oh, that was a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It was a big challenge. And I will speak very respectfully of the CEO that was my boss, because he managed me okay. I mean, he managed to put up with me. But I will say that there were differences in how we did things, how we operated. There are differences in culture. And we also had the unfortunate circumstance of selling and then going right into COVID. So there were some blessings with that. There were also some curses. The blessings were that, well, we were pretty autonomous anyway, so now we're autonomous at home. So I felt like I was given a lot of latitude that I probably wouldn't have if we had been suddenly going to an office downtown and being in a different environment. So that was a different switch. But it is definitely hard. And I realized, I could be a good soldier, but boy, it was tough when it came to, well, I want to give this person a raise. I want to hire this person. I want to go in this direction. And that's just not necessarily my decision anymore. So yes.
Very interesting. As you were saying, I realized after 10 years I needed to do revenue issue, visibility of revenue, making the founder less important. These are key issues in terms of determining the value of a company. And it's interesting how, I feel like I stand on a desk on a regular basis and say, if the founder is too important, the company has less value,
Yes.
and trying to get those thoughts across. Now that you've lived that, tell me what you do with clients now to help them make those kinds of transitions away from founder dependency, revenue,
Mhm.
visibility, et cetera. What do you do?
So there are really five things that, just because there's a lot to focus on in terms of increasing your enterprise value, but I like to start by saying the very first thing you can do that's should be relatively easy is de-risk your business. So take away the risk. Make sure you have the right trademarks. Make sure you don't have any lawsuits out there or whatever. It's a relatively, just check the box, de-risk the business. But then the other things that are really important, which I know and particularly for government contractors, the owner dependency is key. So how do you start to dial in your leadership team to make sure that they're leading the charge? It's okay that the business um, needs you, but it doesn't need to be dependent upon you. If you can take a 3-week trip and not have to check in all that much, that's a really good sign. So we talk about that and taking baby steps towards making that happen. The client concentration is a big problem, particularly in the government contracting space. We often find that they win a very big contract. It's happened with one of our clients who exited recently. And, it could be a $20 million contract. Well, if that goes away, and the rules have changed recently, as you know, so we got to be thinking about that. And how do you then go after methodically some additional contracts where you're a prime contractor, not just a subcontractor, to make it more successful. And then there's also the client recurring revenue. So it's really nice in government contracting that majority of the contracts are recurring revenue. So that's what brings strength to the government contracting community, in my opinion. You don't always have that situation with a tech company, for example, but the recurring revenue is really important. And then just the ability to have the brand that's represented well and that reflects what you do. So it's almost as if we could look at it as the fundamentals that need to be there to make a company strong are what is done in an advisory capacity and where we provide that advisory counsel. And then what we do on the branding is what we do to help defend what you're actually creating internally. So those things that are important. So
So
there's been
let
an
me
analogy. I'm sorry.
no, that I want to go through those real, one by one because they're really important. The founder dependency is incredibly important. I was speaking to a business owner yesterday, I think, has a wonderful business, and he is a one-arm paper hanger.
Mhm,
Not only is he still billable, but he does all the proposals, he does all the finance, he does all, I mean, like, it's like, do you ever sleep? How the heck do you do all of this? And
mhm.
I said, why do you do this? Why don't you at least outsource your CFO, your finance work, or whatever it might be? And it's like, I like the control. I like to control it. And I find that's a real issue with business owners that they're in it, they love the control, but the control can actually limit them in terms
Yeah.
of growing and scaling the company and getting value out of it. What do you do? What do you say to a business owner that says, I know I'm going to do it right. I'm going to have to spend more time checking other people's work. How do you get a
Mhm.
founder to lighten up a little bit so that they can trust other people?
Well, it's not easy, but I will say that it's doable. And I think there's a trade-off. You either will take less for your company when it's sold, or and might like just burn yourself out so much before that even happens that it will even devalue your company even more, or you continue on and then it's a lifestyle business. If you're going to have a lifestyle business, you can absolutely operate that way. But if you want to have a business that can be scalable and sold and exited successfully, that brings joy and happiness and money to all of your employees and all of your surroundings, then that's a different option. In the event that you want to make that happen, we start by looking at the processes of which that CEO is managing. So we're dealing with that with a client right now. He does everything. He's got a big team around him, but we're looking at all the processes that he's managing and literally shadowing him to make sure that we know all the things that he's doing that he can one by one peel off and delegate and give to somebody. So it's a process, but if we handle it in first 90-day sprints that are broken down into monthly and then weekly tasks, so like let's do these things in this month, let's do these things in month two, these things in month three, you'll find that at the end of a 90-day period, a 90-day sprint, you're feeling pretty good about, okay, I did get rid of a couple things and it wasn't painful. But to suddenly say, the business can't be dependent upon you. An owner, I was there, I know it. I don't know how to do that. I need help. I actually hired someone like me 3 years before we exited my company because I knew I was part of the problem. And so I
So
think,
even as you have this expertise, you know, doctor should not treat themselves. Lawyers should not be their own lawyer. You're saying
yep,
that you brought somebody in to help you,
I
even though
did.
this is your area of expertise.
Absolutely. And game changing. It was game changing because it's really hard to fix your own problems. It just really hard. And this person served as an accountability coach and also a reminder to get us out of the weeds and say, these are the things, these things are important. You preach this to your clients. So now you need to do it yourself and deliver. So we were our own customer, basically. And that was a really exciting process to go through. So I know firsthand how good it felt to say, we moved the needle 1% last month. That felt great. And look at the benefits from it. So that was really powerful.
Interesting. Very. Now, another one that you said was customer concentration.
Hmm.
In GovCon, there's only one customer, the federal government.
Right,
However, that's a ridiculous analysis. So you can then say, okay, all of our work is in the Army. Well, the Army is a very big organization. There's lots of
right.
different agencies within the Army, et cetera. So what do you think about customer concentration? Um, and it's very challenging in GovCon. If you're a company that's got 40 million in revenue or less, the likelihood of you having some very substantial concentration is pretty high.
Right.
So what do you advise people to do about customer concentration in GovCon?
So with customer concentration is near and dear to my heart because it is so, so important and critical. And I think there are a couple ways you can go about it. And this is a business development initiative. It might mean making some investments. We all know the almighty prime contract is where you want to be versus a subcontract, but it might just help to start to get a couple of subcontracts in adjacent markets. So if you're in civilian and you suddenly want to shift it, to to defense or intel, that's just going to be a much different transition. I have not a client, but a friend and a colleague who does a lot of work within Department of Labor, for example, and has been able to morph to, Department of Health and Human Services. So just adjacent, semi, sort of similar scenarios in terms of the mission of the government agency. And we're, rather than just making a quick shift to say, oh, I'm going to go all state and local. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a lot of different contracts within one agency, as long as they're owned by different program managers and by different entities. So that's what matters, because the client concentration is a response to having too many eggs in one basket. And so as long as those programs aren't interrelated, then it's not as much of a challenge as you might think it is. But I will say that there is a way to slightly go to adjacent agencies from a business development standpoint, but that takes time.
Um, Completely agree that that customer concentration is a very big deal. A lot of it is comes down to business development. I mean,
Hmm.
that is, how do I get more work? It's easier to do the same work that you're doing in the same agency in a different office, okay, to
Hmm.
do the same work that you're doing at a different agency. That's fine.
Hmm.
Doing different work is more challenging, so the further away you go from what it is you're doing now, the more difficult it is to do that. But those are really business development issues. Are you helping people with business development?
I do not help people with business development, but I do at least try. We try to look at how can you accomplish the business development objectives. I have a couple of sister companies that are like mine, sister and brother companies, if you will, that do that work, that serve as like virtual chief growth officers within a government contracting company. So there are resources out there. I don't believe that I would ever be the all one thing is all whatever that expression is, you know. I just believe that if you find the right kind of partner and deal team around you, that you can make that happen.
I completely agree. So dealing with that customer concentration is incredibly important. And then you mentioned recurring revenue, which
Hmm.
to me is backlog. In the
Yeah.
GovCon world, we tell people we want to look at what your trailing 12 months revenue has been, and we want to see a minimum of 2 times that amount in backlog. And we're happier when we see 3 times. And I have to say, that feels like one of the changes that occurred in 2025 because backlog doesn't have the same sanctity that it
Yes.
did previously. You need
Yes.
more of it in case you lose some of it.
Yes.
Um, so, what metrics are you looking at for recurring revenue to say, you're not quite there or you're in good shape?
Well, I will say that in 2025, that was a huge, in my opinion, just a huge sort of blow to how government contracting companies are, how GovCons are measured and valued. And that was a shame because there's just uncertainty for the first time in a very long time. So I think for us, what we would look at is in terms of recurring revenues, maybe there are projects out there that you can create as guaranteed programs. I can't speak to the contractual side of it. That's not my area of expertise. But I will say that sometimes it's not even something that owners think about or even know about. So I think sometimes it's just that, a government contracting company may not realize that in terms of evaluation for their company. I just spoke to someone 2 weeks ago who has a $30 million government contracting company and didn't realize that that backlog is going to be treated very differently than before. So you can't count on it. So the more that you can make that, in my opinion, defensible and demonstrate that you have the means and the purposes and the ability to make that money real and actually happen, those contracts happen, the more sole source you are, the better. But again, that's not my area of expertise, so I don't want to profess that these are things that we could help you to do. But it is very important. And the more historical trailing 12 months as you talked about that you have, the better. That's always going to matter. At the end of the day, it's always the numbers that start the process. And then
Absolutely.
what increases or decreases the value are all those intangibles that we're just talking about today that matter. So the more history you have from that, I just know that that's what matters. And I also think little things like, Fast Inc. 5000 awards or like fastest growing GovCons or all those awards that demonstrate that you have a track record of growth and a track record of success. That in and of itself demonstrates that you probably have a pretty good eye on recurring revenue.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it used to be in the old days, 2024, that if you had backlog, if you had a contract with 3 option years, banks would take those 3 option years as money in the bank. The
Yes.
likelihood of that happening was close to 90+%, and it was going to
Hmm.
happen. Now, not so much, although, 2026 is a bit of a revert to the norm, to the mean.
Hmm.
It's going back a little bit, but it is affecting how these deals are being structured, where buyers want some level of, I'm willing to pay you this money if I get this backlog, but if I don't get this backlog, I shouldn't have paid you for that. And, so there's a little bit more risk sharing now in a way that a year or two ago that didn't really exist. So it
Right.
changes how these deals are done.
It's very important. And I know, again, I can't speak to that as to the extent that you can, because that's a very, very relevant and important point to bring up. And I think that that's where your expertise would come into play, not to turn this back to you, but that's where your expertise come to play, because you have to make sure that the deal is being structured so it doesn't create some kind of a take back, or some situation or scenario where they end up having to come back to the table with money. And so that's where I applaud you for the things that you would be doing. I mean, seriously, that's a really important reason why someone would work with an organization like yours, because of having the understanding of those nuances. I will say that there are government contracting companies that I have seen and witnessed that have not used an investment banker, and it hurts them because of exactly that reason. The terms aren't going to be favorable to them in the end, and you end up wasting money, unfortunately. So,
They actually don't. M&A is complicated. And,
mhm.
you can have a conversation and say, well, that makes sense to me. But it's not the market norm and you're leaving money on the table. So there's some real values to that. Um, I'm going to ask you a loaded question, which
Okay.
is, when should somebody start thinking about the kind of preparation that you do to get them ready to sell? How far in advance should they be doing that?
Well, it's funny. I was just at a lunch and I was talking about the conversation to be something along the lines of like today. And the analogy that I gave is you don't wait until you're 40 to start investing in a 401k. You start when you're 20. So the earlier you start, the better. You don't have to be selling in 3 years. You don't have to start just because and I imagine you tell this to your clients too. If you at least start at least understanding the process and become smarter around it, then you're not cramming it all into a year's time. So, from a communication standpoint, you can be doing all those things the entire time and be building a great business regardless. So, you can look like a bigger agency, particularly for those companies, those GovCons that are getting past the small business set aside, type of scenario. You got to compete on a different level. So, why not start now? Because unlike there's this analogy that I use where we're like the stager, and we're for a real estate company, and if you really want to fix what's underneath, then you might bring in someone to remodel your bathroom or get new granite countertops. Well, it might mean that you want to have that website that's ready because you might find you want to live in the house still. Maybe you don't sell. So it's never too early. That's never really the conversation we should be having. It's when is it too late and to really make an impact. But I'm not saying that everyone has to sign up today. Not everybody's ready. But I do think that if you really want to give it a go from a communication standpoint and from a preparation standpoint, depending on where you start as a baseline, 2 to 3 years is ideal. But can we do it in a year? Sure. Can we do it in 6 months? Like deliver a company that's ready to go to market and use your services, at sbLiftOff, that would be great. But we'd like to have as much time as possible, and there's no reason to not start now.
One of the things I like to tell business owners is the changes that you need to make to your company to increase its value in a transfer are the same changes that you need to make it easier to run your company. That
Yes.
your life will be better if you've made those changes. As you said, you can redecorate your bathrooms and your kitchen, but wouldn't you like to live in that house as
Right.
opposed to simply doing it to give it to somebody else?
Right.
Do it
Right.
for yourself first. And it gives you a word that I use a lot, optionality. It gives you the
Optionality.
option.
Right.
You can
Hmm.
either stay there and continue to run the company. That's fantastic. Or you can decide that no, you're ready to, in fact, do a transfer. But it gives you that choice.
I totally agree. I think that that's the theme here is there's choices. And it depends upon what the business owner wants in the end. Is it the highest price? Is it to have the best life? Is it to have a post-exit plan? Is it to leave a legacy? What are the ideals of that business owner? Because there are choices to make. If you don't care about getting the best top price and you really want flexibility and be able to walk out the, it just depends. Everyone wants something different. And so we like to start there with what does the business owner want to do and create, and why is he or she here in the first place? And then we can work back from there. And I think that's a good way to approach it.
So interesting because I was talking to a business owner recently and I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "What does it matter what I want?" I said, "Because we have choices to make here. And if you want this, we'll go this route. If you want that, but you are the owner. Your hands are on the steering wheel. You get to make these choices. Make them consciously.
Right.
And whatever choice you make is the right choice. But know that you're making a choice in that process, and that becomes kind of challenging. Do you find a different process if you're working with smaller companies than working with bigger companies? I mean, what's the range of size of companies that you work with, and do you go through different processes depending upon the size of that company?
Absolutely. We haven't represented any companies that have an EBITDA of lower than like $1 million or something like that, but there are certain thresholds that matter in terms of enterprise value and what your EBITDA is, whether or not you're lower, middle market, higher market. I will say full disclosure with SpeakerBox, the company that I owned, and with my clients now, they're in that lower to middle market range. So
Hmm.
anywhere with EBITDA from, maybe 5 to 10 million to 50 million. Now there's a company that we worked with, and I'm very proud of this story because it was a government contractor that primarily worked with state and local agencies and was a government contractor, primarily staffing, to be honest, butts and seats.
Hmm.
And so, but had a little kind of product over here that did data analytics for some of these agencies tracking COVID, tracking opioid, the opioid overdoses, and those like very, very analytical data that was a software product that they created. And even though 90% of the revenue was in the government contracting space, they were seen as a product company. And we packaged them that way. So that was the valuation they received, which was much higher. And so I think from that standpoint, their their EBITDA was maybe a couple of million, but they had a significant 20 to 25x return on that on the multiple because of that. So the short answer is I just love telling that story. But the short answer is that between 5 and 10 million and maybe 40 million, I would say the it really depends upon the kind of business that it is, but in the government contracting space, you can get to be big pretty quickly, and that's probably just as much of a transition to consider.
You made reference in our earlier conversation to something about a lifestyle business versus not being a lifestyle business. What does a lifestyle business mean to you?
So I can spot a lifestyle business when I see a business owner that the kids are on the payroll and they take lots of trips and the growth is, yeah, it's steady, steady, steady Eddie, it's fine. And they're not really thinking about exiting. That's more of a lifestyle business. The business is a piggy bank. Um, it is still very surprising to me how many companies that are relatively good sized companies that I go to and the business owner isn't even on the payroll. So, I mean, they might be on the payroll, but like they're taking draws from the business. The business is an ATM versus an ongoing entity business. And there is nothing wrong with that. You can make a lot of money. There are a lot of business owners that say, why would I sell when I'm making the money I need to make? So it's really about, again, that choice that you take. So if and to me, a lifestyle business is keeping you and your family happy and building for the future and maybe selling someday, maybe passing it along to your children. It's just very different than growing with intention and growing enterprise value to leave a legacy. It's just very different.
Very, very interesting. We often talk about your company is in fact a machine and it takes in revenue and you do stuff to it and you have profit. And
I
that
like
is
that.
a fantastic thing. I mean, that is the American dream. It's wonderful.
Uh-huh.
But the liquidity event is whether or not you can take that machine and sell it to somebody else. And
Yes.
you can only do that if you deal with the founder dependency, the recurring revenue, the customer
Yep.
concentration, the whole lifestyle, are you reinvesting in the company kind of thing. So, those things come up in your world and you come kind of before sbLiftOff comes to the table. But people who've gone through your process are probably far more likely to have a wonderful transaction than folks who have basically been saying, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Um,
Absolutely.
One of the things that's saddest for me is when somebody comes to me and says, okay, Sharon, I'm just done. I'm just
I'm
done. I
done.
can't do
Hmm.
anymore. It's like,
Hmm.
I understand that. That's completely fine. But boy, if we can talk 2 or 3 years before that, here are the changes that we could have made. Obviously, I don't say that when they're done because that's just, rubbing
Right,
salt in the
right,
wound.
right,
Um,
right.
how do you see the market having changed in GovCon? Because you were working in there for Speaker Box for a while and you're now here. How have things changed over the last 5 or 10 years?
Well, the M&A activity has picked up pretty significantly in my mind, and a lot of that is because I think there is somewhat of the realization that um, there's a lot of uncertainty, just put it out there. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think there's a little bit of that, wow, is the housing market going to drop? Do I sell now? I mean, there's a little bit of that mentality to it on one hand, but to your point earlier about someone coming to you and being tired, it is, it is, it is, it is a shame when you do see that because the reality is that they've built a nice business, but it may not be enough to sustain them into the future, into their retirement. And even retirement's being questioned. So there was just there have been a lot of changes that have taken place in the market. And there's a lot of money out there right now. So private equity in particular is just like pouncing on everybody, on HVAC companies, on dentist office, on GovCons. I mean, they're everywhere. Private equity really wasn't in GovCons 5 or 6 years ago, as I recall, not to the extent that they are today. So I think it's something to be thinking about, and that's why there's been kind of a heightened fervor of activity and conversations around M&A because of that. Because I think business owners haven't been focused on how do I sell my business. They're thinking about how do I sell to my customers? How do I keep my employees happy? It's just a very different conversation. So I do think that that has really intensified in the last 5 years, which is why I decided to exit the company that I sold after staying there for a little while to start this business because it's exciting. It's exciting and it's really rewarding to see when someone goes out intentionally to to build their business as an exit plan, as their retirement plan, as their whatever, as their legacy. That's it's very enlightening to see when that can happen because you know that you've changed somebody's world, that their life is going to be very different than just turning the lights off and going home.
Completely agree. What is one piece of advice that you would give Elizabeth 15 years ago when you were first starting your company? After all the experiences that you've had building one, selling one, starting a new company, teaching other people these assets, what would you want to have told yourself, 5 years after you started your company?
Oh, I would have wished that someone would have told me that you build an exit or you're always building to exit. I never thought about that. I never thought 20 years down the road would I be selling my company. I think that anyone that starts a business should be building it to exit eventually, whether it's 30 years, whether it's to your kids or to whomever. But if you build it intentionally from that perspective, even lifestyle businesses, build it so that you have something to show for it. Because it's really hard if you walk away from that business because there is no enterprise value and no one's there to buy it for you. So I would have started this process. I would have hired you. You probably weren't here though 20 years ago. So, I mean, seriously, I think that's important.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful
No,
conversation,
this has been
and I
great.
really
Thank you.
appreciate the values that you're bringing to the market. Thank you so much.